From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. We start in Brazil, where thousands of indigenous people have marched through the capital and are protesting in front of the Attorney General's office. They say a law signed by President Michel Temer last year will strike off the map most of the country's indigenous land, and they're demanding that the law be revoked. Mia Alberti reports from Brasilia.
Behind me are the 3,000 indigenous people participating here in the Freeland camp in Brasilia. Now for over an hour they have marched through the heart of the capital until where we are standing now, the office of the Attorney General. And they are demanding that they scrape a law that was signed by President Michel Temer last year, and they call that the genocide law. And they say that this law would wipe off the map almost all of the indigenous land here in Brazil. Now the decree that President Michel Temer has signed basically officializes a political and juridical debate that has been going on for years, that says that one of the conditions for a land to be registered as indigenous is that it had to be registered by 1988, which was the year of the federal constitution. So think of this, in 2018, right now, there's 1,200 indigenous lands in Brazil, but only 30% of those are registered. Only 30% of those are registered now. So imagine how few were registered in 1988. So if this law stands and if this law goes ahead, what the indigenous groups are saying is that this would wipe off the map almost all of the indigenous lands here in Brazil.
That was Mia Alberti from Brazil. A commission in Rio de Janeiro will analyze the first phase of the military intervention ordered by the government in the state. Residents and social organizations report highly negative experiences and say they feel less safe.
Here in Rio de Janeiro, the work of the People's Popular Commission for the Truth has begun, which will investigate cases of abuses as well as crimes carried out during the federal military intervention here in the state of Rio de Janeiro. Today the Commission will hold a meeting, its first meeting since the April 19th launch, in order to establish priorities for this Commission. Included in the priorities is an investigation into the assassination of Councillor Mariel Franco, that occurred more than a month ago. Rio police have yet to name the murderers or the people who may have organized this barbaric act. The Commission will analyze how the army is being conducted on the ground. They've been accused of pestering poor neighborhoods and communities in the city. Residents and social movements have denounced human rights violations, and the Commission will look at the rise in crime, including robbery and murder. They'll have to look at the general rise in human rights violations carried out in these favelas, which are the poorest areas in the city of Rio de Janeiro.
That was our correspondent Andre Vieira from Rio. In Peru, a public prosecutor has denounced the former President Alberto Fujimori and other former ministers for forced sterilizations that occurred under his government. Prosecutor Luis Landa said Fujimori should be prosecuted as he was aware of the practice and allowed it to continue. According to official data, over 270,000 tubal ligament surgeries and 22,000 vasectomies were performed in Peru between 1996 and 2001. They were almost entirely performed on poor Quechua-speaking rural people. The feminist NGO Denounce says it is impossible to know exactly how many were carried under coercion. Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza says the Venezuelan people will choose their president on May 20th without any international intervention. Arreaza made the remarks at a UN forum on peace in New York.
President Maduro, Henry Falcón, and other presidential candidates are campaigning across the country. Each one of them has different political ideas and economic proposals. But the Venezuelan people have the right to choose the best option for them. On May 20, the National Electoral Council will give the results of the presidential elections, and it will represent the will of the people. If the government loses, the ruling party will become the main opposition movement, and we will dedicate ourselves to getting back into power democratically and without violence.
Ecuador and the United States have signed an agreement to fight organized transnational crime. This will allow U.S. drug immigration and customs enforcement departments to work in Ecuador. The agreement also aims to fight money laundering, human trafficking, and weapons smuggling. Both countries aim to build a unit to investigate transnational crime. U.S. Ambassador to Ecuador Todd Chapman said this was the right time to develop military and security projects. Ecuador's Minister of Interior, Cesar Navas, said all countries must unite in the fight against crime.
We all have to join in the fight against transnational crime linked to narco-traffic. Ecuador is not a country that produces drugs or cultivates coca leaves. We don't have drug labs, but the country is used for transit. We know most of the drugs leaving Colombia come through our country and go to Central and North America. It goes to the United States and other countries in the region. To fight this, we all have to remain united.
The United States and my colleagues at the Security Department and the DEA are here to cooperate with the Ecuadorian government in its efforts to fight against transnational crime. We want to support Ecuador to reach that ideal of a region of peace, security, and prosperity.
In Colombia, the leader of the Revolutionary Alternative Forces of the Commons and its party, the FARC, Iván Márquez, said he will not take his seat in Congress until the peace agreement is fully respected. Márquez tweeted that the agreement signed with the government in Havana in 2016 must be respected without any cheating or betrayal. He added that the Congress is trying to bring in a legislation that was not agreed by both parties. FARC members have 5 seats in the Senate and 5 in the House of Representatives. Still in Colombia, Pablo Beltrán, the chief negotiator for the National Liberation Army, has requested protection from the United States in order to continue the 5th round of peace talks. The request comes after Ecuadorian President Lenín Moreno said his country will no longer host the talks or guarantee in the process. This decision has forced the Colombian government and the ELN to find an alternative host. The ELN negotiating team fears the U.S. might request the extradition of ELN members. Senior FARC party member Jesus Santrich has been awarded more than $8,000 from a group of activists in Denmark. The money will go to Santrich's defense team, who is currently fighting an extradition order to the United States. The former guerrilla leader was arrested at the request of the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, after the U.S. accused him of drug trafficking. Nearly 3 decades have passed since the massacre of Trujillo, a series of murders perpetrated by paramilitary groups between 1988 and 1994 in the Cauca Valley in Colombia. Survivors continue to fight against impunity and demand that the government guarantee their safety.
With great pain, the survivors of Trujillo remember their murdered relatives and condemn Colombia's government for failing to provide guarantees that would protect their lives.
In 2013, paramilitary groups, along with certain people who do not want this memorial to stand, they wrote threatening graffitis saying that it would kill us if we didn't leave.
The government had compromised to provide reparations, but in fact, it has done very little.
This process has been extremely limited by the state's policies, especially for those of us who've been affected by the levels of violence here in Trujillo.
The lawyer for the survivors says they have faced many different judicial problems.
The main problem has been lack of collaboration from the government to identify members from the public force who participated in the massacre. Initially, we were told 1 battalion took part in the massacres, but much later we discovered it was actually 3 different battalions that were behind this operation.
Those who witnessed the massacre have continued to work so that younger generations can live in peace.
We were horribly affected by violence, and now we desperately want peace. Colombia deserves real peace.
From the Peace and Reconciliation Memorial Center, the survivors of Trujillo continue to ask the Colombian government for guarantees for truth, peace, justice, and reparations.
Tatiana Portela, Telesur, Bogotá, Colombia.
We'll take a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. In Paraguay, the Supreme Court of Electoral Justice has decided against an election recount. Opposition candidate Efraín Alegre requested the recount, but the court has rejected his call and declared the Colorado Party candidate Mario Abdo Benítez the winner. Opposition parties and social movements gathered in front of the Electoral Justice Building on Tuesday to denounce irregularities and demand transparency. In Mexico, as the electoral campaign goes ahead, a dirty war seems to be growing against the frontrunner and leftist candidate Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Adverts have appeared on Mexico City's buses, comparing López Obrador to other Latin American leaders like Venezuela's Hugo Chávez and Brazil's Lula, under the umbrella of alleged populism. López Obrador says his rivals are waging a fear campaign against him and misrepresenting his proposals on corruption, crime, and the economy.
Without losing our sanity, and by doing it respectfully, we are launching a counter-campaign against this dirty war, to remove the mask of those who are corrupt.
A dirty war is being waged against Andrés Manuel López Obrador. It's complete lies. Everything that they do and say. He's the most investigated man in the country. He's being investigated 3 or 4 times and they couldn't find anything on him.
We continue in Mexico, where university students have taken to the streets to demand justice for the 3 film students murdered in the state of Jalisco.
Indignation over the murder of 3 audiovisual media students in the state of Jalisco was heard loud and clear on the streets of Mexico City. Students from several cinematography schools gathered to voice their anger at the murders of Daniel Diaz, Marco Garcia, and Salomón Aceves, whose bodies were discovered partially dissolved by acid.
It's a story that we all know very well. It's not convenient for the state to investigate deeper because, most probably, the state is involved in this matter and it's been covering up its dealings with the narcos. I don't think they are reliable.
They say that what happened to the students is unacceptable because they were simply filmmakers.
It's something that really scares us, because this is what we do every day. They were filming, they were working, and living in a country where you can do what you are passionate about. It just doesn't make any sense at all.
Since the 3 students disappeared last March in the district of Tonalá, more university students and lecturers joined protests.
We are
demanding a hold on impunity, a cease to violence, a way to stop guns and war, and that they finally hear what we ask for. As a lecturer, as a filmmaker, I think this is a chance to remain together and to show all the anger that exists in our country against this brutality.
The case of the 3 film students is a consequence of the serious violent situation which Jalisco experiences every day. The West Mexican state has suffered disappearances in 118 districts out of 125.
Nicaragua is waiting for the dialogue between the government and the private sector to begin, a day after the Catholic Church accepted to act as a mediator. Meanwhile, the situation on the streets has yet to go back to normal. On Wednesday, in the capital city of Managua, hundreds of people demanded the release of those arrested during the protests. Clashes started last week during demonstrations against President Daniel Ortega and his social security reform that left several dead. Bolivian President Evo Morales asked for an effort to the South American governments to secure UNASUR can continue. The message comes after 6 countries announced they are planning to withdraw their participation in the regional integration body. Via Twitter, Morales called for responsibility to maintain unity as a continent beyond ideological differences. Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Paraguay and Peru announced last week they are suspending their UNASUR membership. And Barbados still doesn't have its election date, even though Prime Minister Fruendal Stewart has only until June 4th to hold the election. Earlier we spoke to Peter Wickham of Caribbean Development Research Services, CADRES. He said the Barbadian Prime Minister's decision to let Parliament dissolve without setting an election date is a regional first. But he also says that it holds the citizens in limbo and could be a bad political move. In fact, Wickham says Stewart's actions are, quote, highly unwise politically.
Generally, longer terms result in defeat. Prime Minister Stewart is now almost at the 63rd month of what should be a 60-year term. And generally speaking, it spells defeat. The polls are looking very bad for him. Strategically, it doesn't make sense, especially as Ms. Molly said, there's not anything that we can say that he's doing while he's there to make things better for him long term. So, I mean, we keep asking what is the strategy, and he keeps saying that he has the time legally, and really it's a question of his legal right, and it's not a question of political strategy. So I draw a blank where that one is concerned as far as the strategy. I think it's highly unwise politically, and I think he will pay dearly for it.
Nurses in Antigua and Barbuda have protested outside Parliament over changes to the way a leading hospital is governed. The nurses at Mount St. John's Medical Center are contesting the wording of a legislation that suggests they must reapply for their jobs at the center after May 31st. There are fears that staff not absorbed by the board will face redundancy. Prime Minister Gaston Brown said it was never the intention to make nurses redundant.
What the initial drafters did is that they assumed that the individuals would remain with the public service and that they had the option to apply to the board. However, that was misinterpreted as though individuals would lose their employment. It's a fact. So, to make it abundantly clear, the language was changed. So, what will happen now is that they would be automatically transferred to Mount St. John, and then you now have the option to say whether or not you wish to stay with the public service. But fundamentally, it is the same thing.
Bakers in Argentina have been giving away thousands of kilos of bread outside Congress. They wanted to show how bakeries are suffering from mounting inflation as the government raises prices for basic services.
Outside Argentina's Congress, an endless line of people waits for a free loaf of bread. It's a reflection of the hard times so many people face as their paychecks don't last through to the end of the month.
Nobody's doing well. We are all going short. We are waiting for free bread because we have to pay rent. We can't buy clothes like before. We can eat like before. The only person with plenty on the table is the president himself.
The bakers have had enough of the difficult situation they face. They came here to the city center to publicize their demands and gave away more than 5,000 kilos of bread.
Everything is going up. Gas, electricity, water, sugar, bread. We can't even eat a decent meal with our kids at the weekend. Does the president think this is okay? They brought vegetables here and everyone lined up. Now they're bringing bread, and that's good.
The protest was triggered by a fall in sales and a sharp increase in the prices of services and raw materials. A 50-kilo bag of flour has gone up by 50% in just 3 months.
We bakers are going through really bad times, the worst in our history. We've never seen anything like this.
The bakeries are in crisis. We are suffering from the increases in service charges, and now we're worried about the increasing price of flour in recent weeks and the fall in sales. There are more than 40,000 bakeries in the country, and that means 400,000 jobs.
The bakers don't see any way out of the crisis. They are making zero profit and say they will keep protesting against a situation that could see 40,000 jobs lost in their industry.
We'll take one last short break, but join us after another look at what our multimedia team has to report. Welcome back. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and South Korean President Moon Jae-in are set to meet on Friday for an ice-breaking summit. They will meet at the Peace House on the South Korean side of the border village of Panmunjom. It will be the first time a North Korean leader crosses into South Korean territory since the end of the Korean War in 1953. Both leaders are expected to talk about North Korea's nuclear and missile technology and inter-Korean relations. Kim is also scheduled to meet U.S. President Donald Trump sometime in May or June. French President Emmanuel Macron says he believes U.S. President Donald Trump will pull out of the Iran nuclear accord. There has been no official statement from Trump on this, but he needs to decide before May 12th on the deadline of the deal, whether the U.S. will continue suspending economic sanctions on Iran that were lifted under the 2015 signed accord, or scrap the deal and restore sanctions. President Macron says he will work on a diplomatic framework to protect the Iran deal, which was signed between 6 nations.
I don't know what the US decision will be, but if you take a rational look at the announcement so far, at the comments made by President Trump, it seems to me that he will not do his utmost to preserve the UN Comprehensive Plan of Action, commonly known as the Iranian nuclear deal.
As many as 13 employees from an opposition newspaper in Turkey have been sentenced to prison on terrorism charges. Here's more on that and some other big stories from around the world.
A Turkish court has convicted 13 journalists and executives from the opposition Cumhuriyet Delhi for helping 3 outlawed organizations. The court also accused them of aiding a failed coup in 2016. Their sentence ranged from 2.5 to 8 years in jail. According to P24 Press Group, there are 160 journalists behind the bar in the country, which is the highest number of jailed journalists in any country in the world.
They are telling people don't do journalism. If you do, we will arrest you and then we will send you to prison for up to 7.5 years. It's like the sword of Damocles. I want to tell colleagues, do not be scared. Keep on doing journalism. Let's keep on doing journalism together.
In another incident of violence against journalists, a 25-year-old Palestinian reporter and photographer succumbed to his injuries in Gaza City. Ahmad Abu Hussein was shot by Israeli forces on April 13th while he was covering protests along the Gaza border. He is the second journalist to be killed since the Great March of Return protests started a month ago. More than 40 people have been killed by Israeli forces since then. The political crisis in Armenia has deepened after a talk between the opposition and the government failed. Tens of thousands of anti-government protesters returned to the streets in the capital city of Yerevan. The demonstrators are calling for an early election. Armenians have been protesting for the last 2 weeks against misuse of power by the president for a decade, Sir Sargsyan.
And finally, we go to Trinidad and Tobago, where some good Samaritans came to the rescue of a leatherback turtle on the country's southwest coast. This video, posted to social media, shows villagers in Cedros using rope and good old elbow grease to help the turtle back to the water. They believe the turtle came ashore to lay eggs, but the tide went down before she got a chance to return to the sea. The nesting season for these creatures lasts until August 31st. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. But this and many other, you can find them on our website, telesurtv.net/English. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.
It is time to stop and listen to ourselves. Lay stress on the events in a country, an era, or a society.